dive right in. Excellent. We're recording now, which is wonderful. We've got a short agenda that's been dropped in the chat. Maybe Marion, you could drop it in one more time since we have new folks in. Let me just turn it over to Secretary Clouser to get us going, and then I'm happy to take the reins back when you want to, Secretary Clouser. If you're here, sorry.
I am here. Thanks, David.
Okay.
So as you said, we have a pretty short meeting and short agenda for today. That after overview and approval of the May 16th minutes, we are discussing the council letter or potential council letter, I should say, regarding the clean heat standard and funding considerations.
Yep, excellent. And we've got folks who can speak to that, both from Rich Cower from the cross sector. Secretary Clouser, you have some things to say about it. Secretary Moore has a few things to say about it. And there may be someone, Jane, is there someone from sort of congressional side of the house that would be helpful today?
We weren't able to join this morning, so Secretary Clouser and Secretary Moore will represent the countering arguments or additional information, I should say.
Additional information. Okay, super. So it's kind of crazy. It's lovely to see everybody. Sorry to be so rushed this morning in this sort of extraordinary meeting here. We can do approval of minutes. Is there anybody need a little more time to look through those minutes or any concerns about them? Anything folks need regarding those May 16th minutes? Anybody need more time? Okay. I'm not seeing requests for more time. I'm not hearing concerns. So let's deem those minutes to be approved. Thanks, folks. Okay. So we've got this letter. And I'm just curious. Let me just turn to Jane for 1 second. Jane, what do you think is the right flow here? Would you like to have Rich say a word about the letter and then Secretary Moore and Secretary Clouser say a few other things?
Yes, that's how we've got it lined up. Thanks so much, David. And
Great.
Rich is there, so appreciate that.
Rich, do you want to give us the 3-minute version of the genesis of this letter and what this really is trying to achieve?
Sure. Thanks, everybody. I'm here today because I was asked by the Cross-Sector Mitigation Committee to go forward with an idea to advance progress on understanding the pros and cons, costs and benefits of a clean heat standard. And for a couple of reasons, to answer the questions raised by the governor in his veto message, which is very clearly calls for better understanding of those things. And also reflecting the fact that there are others who have questions about a clean heat standard and would like to know more about how it would work, what it would cost, what the benefits would be, and so forth. And that it is, in my opinion, and in the opinion of the committee, would be a great shame to waste a year or two and not go forward in examining these questions in more detail while our emissions continue to climb and our heat bills continue to go up. So we thought about what to do. And the two important points here. The first point is that the Climate Council has, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of almost everybody on the council, a continuing responsibility to act and not just to produce a plan, let the plan sit on the table, wait a couple of years to produce another plan. We have a responsibility to advance good policy, advance understanding, and we shouldn't just sit around and wait. And that's part of the genesis of the letter. The other observation is that the legislature actually appropriated over $1 million for the implementation of the clean heat standard. And even though the bill itself, failed to be passed because of the veto, The funds were appropriated and in the budget. I realize that that's a complicated statement, the way budgeting works. But the legislative intent was clearly to advance a clean heat standard. And if we can do so by using these monies or equivalent monies that are available within state government to do the analysis and do some outreach on a clean heat standard, listen to Vermonters, develop some good info, we shouldn't waste another year. That's what the letter says. It also asks, in the realization that in the final analysis, if we're going to have a clean heat standard of any kind, it would require participation by regulatory agencies. The letter suggests that the DPS and the PUC could convene what in the past we've called stakeholder collaboratives to examine how a clean heat standard would work from a regulatory point of view, and how the technical advisory group could advise, how research could be used to aim a clean heat standard in the best direction, and so forth. That's not a formal PUC proceeding that I know some people have concerns about, but rather an open stakeholder process, which I think we have good track record on that in Vermont when we launched energy efficiency programs and in some other cases. It would be possible for those agencies to get a better understanding of how a clean heat standard would work and to allow a lot of Vermonters to participate through a stakeholder process as they did it, similarly, without wasting another year or two to get going. So bottom line, we have a climate emergency. Heating is super important. We need to take action. We're urging the administration to find the money to launch a good study of pros and cons and costs and benefits of a clean heat standard.
Super. Thanks, Rich. And in that study, it's also trying to incorporate the concerns that are expressed from multiple angles, including the concerns around biomass and other things that came up during that legislative debate, if I understand correctly. Is that right?
That's certainly, that's my intent. It's the intent of the committee, and that's the way the letter is drafted.
Great. Okay.
Yeah, I think we should really just look at all these issues and develop some good information to help us make good decisions.
Super. Okay, thanks. That's really helpful. And since the steering committee talked about this last week, both on the administration side and on the legislative side, there's been some discussions about the messy budgeting thing that Rich made reference to. And here, I think Secretary Clouser and Secretary Moore have some updates about what this might actually look like from a budgeting standpoint. So why don't I turn it over to the two of you to walk us through what's going on that end of things.
Sure, I'll start. Thanks, David. So the messy budget situation is a lovely place to start. I think original iterations of the letter requested the use of the $1.2 million that was associated with H715, the clean heat standard that was vetoed. So the steering committee had some conversations about where that money is and how that money could be accessed. And I think there was some confusion that the money was still in the budget for that purpose. So we had a good discussion as a steering committee, and to summarize a long, messy budget conversation, minus legislative action, there's no way to access the $1.2 million because there was not an appropriation. That being said, there was some talk of flexibility. And so over the course of last week, Julie and others at ANR dug deep into the existing Climate Council budget now that we're at year end, and looking at ways, money that was available that we could potentially redirect to do at least a portion of what's requested in the letter and to get started in that process. And that could happen, immediately upon a vote from the Climate Council to kind of redirect these funds in that direction. And I'll let Julie kind of speak more specifically about the amount of funds that we were able to locate and where she's kind of pulling that from and what it would mean for a budget ask in FY23.
Super. Secretary Moore? Hang on, we can't hear you, so there we go.
Okay, thank you. So a couple pieces. I did go back through the FY23 budget and both looked for opportunities to sort of true up against FY22 actuals. And we have a little bit of new information that came to light since the last time we had taken a deep dive into the budget. And maybe we'll start there. The most significant place I believe we can free up resources was around budgeting we had done for space for the climate office. We had been operating under advice from DHR that's since been modified that we would need to have actual physical desks for the new staff in the climate office. Instead, we're going to use a hoteling arrangement, but that frees up almost $45,000 between build out and rent. We were able to go back through with the close of FY22 and look at the actuals we spent on per diems and adjust that budget. And in addition, the municipal vulnerability index responses have come back, and those proposals are, I think, across the board under the budget that had been held. So those were some fairly easy places to go to sort of accrue about $100,000 worth of savings. And then in terms of other options to get to a $200,000 number, one would be recognizing that it's going to take us some time to bring staff online. The workforce challenge, ANR is not immune to the workforce challenges we're all facing. The budget for staff assumed they would start July 1st. We haven't put jobs up yet as we're working on the reorganization pieces we need to do internally. And so there will be some savings that accrue there. And then also just looking at some of the contracts going forward, in particular, the facilitation contract, and recognizing we are anticipating fewer meetings than we had in FY22. And again, there's some opportunity for savings there. So I do think we can make up to $200,000 available from the climate office budget to support this initial work. And that would be directed largely towards an RFP that would hopefully be able to go out in the next month or two to ask some of the questions Rich asked. And then I think there may be an opportunity through budget adjustment potentially if additional resources are required. That $1.2 million obviously exists, but as Secretary Klauser indicated, it hasn't been appropriated. And so my hope would be we would have enough information. Obviously, the work wouldn't be complete by the time the legislature reconvenes and takes up a budget adjustment act, but we would have enough work done to be able to have a sense for what other resources might be needed. So I'm sort of looking at this as phase one of the work. That 200,000 is a rough number. I'd need to work with our budget manager to actually true that up and get an exact detail. But I think that puts us close enough for the purposes of discussion this morning.
Thanks. Okay, some clarity there. So the letter has some key messages in it. And it's important, if you all want to stand behind it, that today we approve that letter. B, it's a little complicated about the 1.2 million. And in the meantime, state government and ANR in particular is trying to free up some resources to get started right away on that while budgeting and legislative action happens in the future. Is that a fair summary from everybody? Okay, so our task today as a council is to say, are we comfortable with this letter going out as it's written and knowing that already ANR and others in state government are trying to figure out how to act on it, despite some real complications on the fact that those monies referenced in the letter haven't actually been appropriated yet. June, how are you? Good morning.
Good morning. I'm very well, thank you. And I hope everybody else is as well. I very much appreciated the presentation just given, and I completely support what Rich is saying about the use of stakeholder processes in front of the PUC in order to develop facts. And I'm very pleased that the committee is thinking in that direction. This is precisely what I had in mind, Rich, when you and I traded texts or messages at the last meeting we were at, where I was saying, how do we move the ball forward and persuade? With those things said, I have to make a note for the record that I am very troubled by the fact that I am a counselor. And this is a letter that is directed at the heart of my agency's mission, and I'm supposed to vote on this. So no, so that puts me in this position of needing to recuse myself. And there is a consistent pattern of actions this council takes where I am having to recuse myself. And that is a construct that I find deeply, deeply troubling. I think the decision's already been made to address this letter to the governor, and I appreciate that. I did not appreciate seeing it addressed to me and my agency, given that I'm a council member, and I would ask the council to keep that in mind for future reference. In a similar vein, I'm a little disturbed by the proposition that this council is going to advocate as to what the Public Service Department should be doing. I don't think that's necessary. I think it's the PUC has all the power in the world to open a convening process, and I just wonder about directing the public advocate's actions in this fashion. It bothers me, and if we can work around that, I'd appreciate it. Not because I have some sort of agenda, but because I don't think it's good hygiene in government. And so I'd appreciate some consideration on that point.
Okay. Thanks, June. And indeed, as you'll see in the letter, this letter is from the legislatively appointed members of the Climate Council because of this concern, the same concern we had last year when we're working on the budget issues, right?
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I just don't think it works. We have, I forget how many members we have, but we're all equally weighted as members, and we're consistently engaging in actions that effectively sideline the executive branch member appointees. And I think it's bad hygiene, but it's what we have. And I just wanted to make note for the record.
Great. So given that this is a quick meeting, are there any concerns from counselors before we officially give it this letter the nod, in addition to what June wanted to put on the record just now? Any other concerns that folks want to share before we give this the nod? We also want to take some public comment in today's meeting. But counselors, anything we need to say before we say yes to this letter and the course of action? Let me go to Abby, and then I'll go to the room. Abby, go ahead. Good morning. Hang on one sec. You're still on mute, so we can't hear you. We still can't hear you, Abby, if you're trying to speak. You may be double muted on your phone or something. Okay. Hang on, we'll give 1 sec here. The old Zoom double mute on the phone. Maybe Abby, while you're wrestling with that, let me just go to another hand and we'll come right back to you. Let's go to the conference room there, which has its hand up. Whoever.
It was me.
Yeah.
I just wanted to indicate, I'm not sure we need both. I mean, I think the point that Kristen and I don't want to put words in her mouth and recognize her hands up too, but the point we were trying to make is I think the request itself is going to be a hard one for folks to deal with and unlikely to be successful, and would encourage the council to consider what we've offered or what I've offered this morning as an alternative approach, as opposed to in addition to, with the idea that we would develop and issue an RFP, having the cross-sector mitigation committee engage in review and comment on that RFP, so that we try to achieve as much of kind of what Rich has laid out, concerns the governor identified in his veto message, within the constraints of what we're able to get started with now, and go from there. I don't know, Kristen, if that was what you were going to say too.
Great. And I'm just to be super clear though, Secretary Moore, are you suggesting a modification to the letter? Or are you saying just as a point of clarity, the pathway likely will be what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm saying I don't know that we need to send the letter, since the letter would largely be used by ourselves to develop an RFP, assuming the council is amenable to the approach outlined, I described, where we would use some of these existing resources for phase one, essentially, of work to do that background and evaluation related to a clean heat standard.
Okay. Okay. Secretary Flynn, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Well, Secretary Moore pretty much summed up what I was planning to say, but with respect to the letter, it becomes, doesn't it, a bit of a moot point if the 1.2 million has not been appropriated. Sending the letter is just a gesture. The money's not there, and it's not able to be carved out for the purposes the letter states. Secretary Moore reported that, if I wrote down the numbers correctly, that the agency has found at least approximately $200,000 to start an RFP to determine some of the outcomes of the letter. So again, what's the goal? Is the goal to start a process to identify, I think, as Rich said, good stories of clean heat standards, or is it to wrestle over $1.2 million number? And perhaps then the letter could be either redrafted using the numbers that ANR has identified, or is it necessary to deal with the letter at all and just move forward with what ANR proposes? Thank you.
Thank you. Rich, and then Jared, and then I want to come back to Abby. Whenever, Abby, you're ready to talk, just shout out. Rich?
Well, I've already spoken, so maybe Jared should go first, and then I'll
Thanks.
answer
Thanks.
other comments.
And I'm just conscious of the time too, is everybody, so just go right ahead, Jared.
Yeah, just quickly a clarification. And first, to answer Secretary Flynn's question, I agree that we have to be clear on the question that we're trying to answer and the goal. And I think what that is, my understanding from the letter, is that we have the information and analysis at hand to answer the questions that came up in the legislative process and from the administration as we were considering the clean heat standard. I believe that that's what we're trying to do here. My understanding is different than yours, Secretary Flynn. So Secretary Clouser or Secretary Moore, please correct me if I'm wrong. But what I heard on the steering committee call is that while the funds have not been appropriated, they could be available by an action of the Joint Fiscal Committee. So this does not seem to be a symbolic or performative exercise. I think that this is an important letter to send in the event that it seems like there is a potential pathway with ANR funds, which I support. And I really thank Secretary Moore for doing the due diligence to identify those funds. But it did not sound to me like that is a certainty, or that it sounded like there may be some uncertainty about the amount of funds and the availability of funds and the timeline of that. So to me, I would support going down the route that Secretary Moore articulated, but I would also support sending this letter so that the Joint Fiscal Committee is aware of this issue and can consider it, especially if those funds do not become materialized from ANR. One way or another, we need to be able to do this analysis so we're not talking in circles and not making the progress that we're legally required to make. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Rich, and then Secretary Clouser, and then let's see where we are at.
Okay, a couple of responses. I think Secretary Clouser, Secretary Flynn may well be right that the Joint Fiscal Committee doesn't have the authority to release these funds in the near term. And I really very much appreciate the efforts that Secretary Moore has told us about, finding some funds to get going on this necessary work. So congratulations, this is great. I want to be entirely supportive of that. I still think that we should send the letter. The letter itself says, we believe that these funds or equivalent funds should be used during in coming months to address these concerns. And notes, and in point number 1, with proper approvals, funds could be released in order to do this work. The fact that the legislature will have the opportunity in the Budget Adjustment Act in January to do something about it means to me that we should send a letter, because this letter will end up informing the legislature's consideration of this question during the Budget Adjustment Act. So the process that Secretary Moore talked about, finding funds to get going, talking to the legislature in January, that's all supported by the letter, and the letter doesn't contradict that, that course of action at all. And finally, I reiterate, I guess, that I think it's really important that the council be very clear in supporting developing the information, conducting the outreach, hearing from stakeholders, and that we go on the record as saying that we want to see progress, and we believe progress is necessary.
Okay, thanks, Rich. Secretary Clauser, and then let's really make a decision here about what's happening in the letter, and because we're really out of time.
Yeah, thanks, David. Richard just made, I think, my point. I was just addressing Jared's question of Joint Fiscal Committee and their authority to actually appropriate money, which the Joint Fiscal Committee in and of itself does not have authority or ability to appropriate funds. And we did get confirmation of that from Jane reached out to the Joint Fiscal Committee, and they confirmed through email with Jane that they do not have that authority. There are other ways, right? A special session. I mean, there are other ways for legislative action, but the Joint Fiscal Committee in and of itself does not have that ability to appropriate funds that are not in the budget.
Yeah. Okay. So I think it's important that we also, you've been watching the chat, if I have as well, that there's interest in some public comment on this. Before we go to public comment, I just want to clarify what folks are saying. My understanding walking into this call is the decision was for you all, the council, do we send this letter? It's in the name of the legislative appointees. And we've heard some concerns from the agency folks about that. I haven't heard concerns from any of the legislative appointees about sending the letter as is. We need to capture the concerns expressed by June and everybody else in the meeting minutes from this. Abby, let's try to get your mic open.
All I will say is that I have concerns about sending a letter. I know we're out of time, so I'll just leave it there. I'm not incredibly comfortable having my name on the letter at this point, given the lack of engagement I feel certain members of the council have received in regards to their concerns regarding the clean heat standard and the myopic focus that it's taking. Thanks.
Okay, Abby, if there were a change to it, what would you change?
David, this is Liz.
Liz, your audio is really hard to hear. I wonder if you could throw in the chat.
Liz.
Shoot. I wonder if you just throw that comment in the chat, Liz, because your audio is really
I'm sorry,
rough.
I couldn't. I'll try in a minute.
Thanks. Okay. Well, this is one of these situations where it's a little awkward too, because again, it's I'm hearing concerns from Abby. Kelly, do you want to say a word? And I also want to take some public comment before we sign off. Kelly, go ahead.
Yeah, briefly. It sounds like there's less time pressure to get this letter out immediately if we have this buffer of some extra funds in the council's budget. So perhaps we could circle back up, hear the people's concerns, make sure that we don't have anything that suggested that we can't do by law from different agencies, and then get it ready to send out a little bit later, maybe in the fall, but well before the new budget adjustments happen in January.
Thanks, Kelly. That's absolutely a possibility. And considering the concerns we're hearing on the call today and the fact that there's progress being made by ANR, that could be the pathway. Because, I'm hearing Abby express concerns, but we don't really have a clear pathway towards addressing them in the way this is drafted right now. And great. So what we're hearing, and we've heard from also other counselors who weren't able to attend today, like general support for the idea, let's go and do this work, let's do the studying, let's make it happen. The letter itself seems to be causing some stress and strain. We could potentially vote on it if somebody wants us to do that right now. I would suggest, unless I hear somebody's enthusiasm for a vote right now on this, to go down Kelly's path, which is let's not try to fix this right now in 2 minutes. And let's figure out a pathway that would send the right signals to the legislature and everybody else in going into the next budget season. And we know that that's part of our work in October as well. Rich, we're going to do a few minutes of public comment and then let's finish up.
Sure. I guess I just want to say, if I thought the letter was written to be as broad and open as it could be towards everybody's concerns. And that's my intention. And that was the intention of the committee. I'm happy to hear from people if they think words in the letter should be changed to be somehow even more open and broad to concerns about the structure of a clean heat standard, the resources that might be involved, et cetera, et cetera. But either way, I think the council should support a proposal from the secretary that work begin to analyze pros, cons, benefits, costs, and that should begin right away.
Great. Let me just check on that particular point. Is there any concern about what Rich says right now, which is, yes, you as a council are standing behind the idea of, for instance, ANR going forth and doing an RFP in which you can help shape? Any concern about that? Okay, great. Let's do a little bit of public comment and then let's finish up. Let's take 5 minutes for this. Apologies, we're running a little bit late, but I've seen some public comment in the chat and that's great. We can record that in this meeting and thanks for those thoughts. If folks want to speak verbally as well for some public comment around this issue, again, I want to encourage folks to keep the public comment focused around the issues we're working on today. And we'll, as a council, have more time to work together with folks in September. But are there folks who'd like to speak and supplement the comment that was shared in the chat? Anybody would like to speak who's joining us today? Judy Dow, go ahead, please.
Good morning. I listened to your last meeting and I listened to this one, as I have many others. And the first thing I want to say is the Abenaki people have no word in their language for time, because when everybody's together and everything is ready, it's time. You wouldn't collect maple sap in September because everything's not ready. What's happening at these meetings is there's an extremely biased attempt to not have dialogue with the public. What you have is comments. You don't address the comments most of the time. You give a gracious thank you, and that's it. What we want is to be engaged in conversation. Because of that, there's an extreme lack of equity occurring at all of your meetings. And Mr. Cowart, you said the reason for the letter was because you had a continued responsibility to act, participation by regulatory agencies, and you wanted to hear from stakeholders. Are you considering the public a stakeholder? Are you considering true dialogue? and not just a 1-minute comment at the
Yeah.
end of each meeting? Well, that would be a change. I also would like to say, as a member of the Legislative Social Equity Caucus, I have been asked to tell you that we will be writing our own bill to oppose the direction you have chosen. As we endeavor to move forward in solving the climate crisis, there must be equity and all voices must be heard equally. If you cannot engage in this discussion and choose rather only to hear the comments of those with differing opinions instead of engaging in a dialogue with them, the Social Equity Caucus will do so. Thank you.
Thanks, Judy. Thanks. Okay. Are there other comments, Cheryl?
Hi. Yeah, I wasn't going really to say anything because I said something, a week ago at the steering committee meeting. And well, just like Judy just said, it was, well, I mean, it does feel like it's being ignored because nobody says anything about it ever. I think you even said that you were going to bring up my comments from last week here at this meeting, but that didn't happen. So that's sad. And all I am saying now is that it is true that I've actually made this comment here and at numerous other meetings that it's just kind of venting and doesn't feel great because I thought we have some pretty valid things to say. I did say things last time. You can go back and listen to the comment from last week. It's important that you should. I typed stuff into the chat, just a tiny bit just now. So that's it. Yep, just venting here instead of actually giving out, helpful information or comments or, opinion that you might want to use. Thanks.
Okay. All right, Cheryl, thanks. See, Annette, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I'd like to just bring to your attention, when you talk about wanting to engage the public more and more stakeholder process around, for instance, the clean heat standard. I don't know if you're aware, but the day that the testimony sponsored by 350 Vermont occurred in the legislature, in the Senate, go take a look at it. Look at the view counts. Last time I looked, it was 10,000 people. So having a lot of experience with the Public Utility Commission in the last decade, and especially with EPUC, where their system can't handle the net metering rule, which has nowhere near 200 people participating. I just want people to understand that the idea of embarking on some sort of broad public outreach has real world implications. And I'm still absolutely shocked by that 10,000 number, but that is the sort of thing that we can expect if there is some sort of attempt to engage the public on elements of the clean heat standard, such as biofuels, that really have not been discussed by this council, but yet are being promoted by the council as though it was something that was discussed. And I also will follow up on the two things I posted in the chat. And one I know is not that relevant to what you're doing today. However, if new appointments are being done in October, I really want you to think about the inequitable distribution of the membership of the council. And the other is that I remember when I served on Vermont's committee to ensure clean air back in 2001 by the appointment of the governor, that we had to comply with an ethics and conflict of interest policy. And I think that there's likely a need for disclosure on anyone who is benefiting financially from the work of the council. So thank you for hearing my comments today.
Thanks, Annette. Okay. Okay. Cheryl, your hand just came back up.
Yeah, I just have one quick thing to say again, is that so many times people talk about public engagement. You guys have public engagement here. at every meeting, pretty commonly. I mean, I don't know if it's at every meeting. The ones that I go to are pretty well attended by, you know, a bunch of public. I'm one. I'm engaging. Engage with me. The public comes to these meetings and we count here too, not just in a meeting set up for public engagement. So that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Cheryl. Okay. June, last word, and then let's finish up for the day.
We're out of time. But again, my agency houses the public advocate. And having worked in this space for 20 years, we are not moving at the speed of trust. And I think we need to think hard about that. Secretary Moore and Secretary Clauser have proposed a path forward that addresses the urgency. I think this council would be well advised to take more time to deliberate on the kind of public statement that that letter makes. And again, I'm just in this impossible situation where I can't vote. It's ridiculous. Thank you.
Thanks, June. So in that spirit, it feels like where we're landing today is that we're enthusiastic about ANR using funds that it can find to make progress right away on studies. And we need a little bit more time to figure out how to send a message like the message in the letter for a lot of the reasons that have come up. That's where I'm hearing where we're landing. And that doesn't make everybody happy because I know some people would like to send that letter right now. But that's my sense. So let me just check as we finish up here today, is that where we're landing? Any concerns if that's the result of today's meeting? Enthusiasm around ANR's next steps and getting that happening. Let's figure out how to frame up this conversation so that whatever communication this council gives gets a little bit more conversation around it, since this issue is, requires that level of conversation. Okay. All right, folks. Let's leave it there for today. I want to thank everybody for coming at short notice to deal with a tricky issue. And thank Rich, who's put a lot of time into this, and others who have. And we'll be seeing all of you in September, if not before, at steering committee meetings and other things that are happening over the summer. Secretary Clauser, anything else to finish up before we go?
Nothing to add. Thanks, Stephen.
Okay. All right, folks. Thank you. Thank you all, and everybody who is here contributing to the meeting, whether you're on the council or not. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.